Okay, here we are as promised. If you're out of the loop, I ranked the top 50 most jacked fullbacks in NFL history in a 10-part series here on the Tube. I'll link that playlist below if you want to check it out. We highlighted players like Corey Schlesinger, whose wrestler neck and traps withstood over 200 face mask shattering collisions, earning him the nickname Anvilhead. Lorenzo Neal, whose jacked, dense, and durable physique served as heavy-duty armor throughout his 16-year NFL career, including 11 straight seasons blocking for a 1,000-yard rusher. Mike Allstott, who barreled through defenses with his tree trunk legs, cementing himself as one of the most powerful ball carriers of all time, and Mike Carney, whose thickness has left scientists befuddled to this very day. These players demonstrated a level of toughness we may never see again in the NFL and had some of the most powerful physiques in the history of pro sports. These are what I call old school fullbacks. I had a blast making these videos, and I thought it would be a great idea to use this series as inspiration to create free muscle building programs for you to use so you can get jacked like an old school fullback. And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to share these with you. I've created two programs. The first is called Freight Train, and it's geared more towards beginners. The second, Battering Ram, is a little more heavy duty, and I'll be using this video to dive into both in great detail. And below, I've linked each program in Excel and Google Doc versions. Now, I would prefer that you use the Excel version because the formatting just looks a little bit cleaner and it's easier to use. Within those sheets, I have a tab with many notes on variables such as volume, intensity, and progression, among other things. I also have weekly training log tabs so you can track all your training sessions. Below, you'll also find a link to two other training resources. The first is my PR tracker that you can use to keep a record of all your rep PRs, and the second is my diet tracker, where you can track your weight gain or weight loss progress and keep a record of your daily caloric intake. Remember, to use any of these files, you'll need to save a copy to edit the sheet. And if you have any questions on anything, you can reach me at zdspyt@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's get into it. I want to make it very clear that these programs are geared towards hypertrophy training. The main goal here is to help you put on muscle, not necessarily make you a better athlete. These are not sports performance programs. You're not going to see Olympic lifts, plyometrics, sprint work, agility work, and certain training variables such as rep ranges, exercise selection, tempo, and proximity to failure. These are going to be more in line with bodybuilding training. Now, with that being said, these programs could certainly help you put on strength and size, which could potentially help you in certain sports, provided you maintain your athletic ability. Furthermore, these programs can help with injury resilience and mobility for an athlete. And I'm going to give you a couple performance-oriented channels. These would be great resources for athletes looking to boost strength, power, and overall athleticism. The first is Will Rattel. He's a former D1 linebacker, and funny enough, he briefly lined up at fullback in the NFL for the Falcons during the 2016 preseason.
Toss to White. He's in! Patriots win the Super Bowl!
He's a college strength coach and very impressive athlete and lifter. And fun fact, he actually appeared in this series for a split second in one of the highlight clips. Then we have Alec Onkiri. I've been following his channel for a long time, very underrated YouTuber. He's well-rounded in his approach to training, very strong and athletic. I get a lot of ideas from my own lifting from his channel, and he puts out a lot of great content, so be sure to check both of these guys out. You'll need access to a gym, although variations of the programs could be done in a home gym setting, provided you have basic equipment like squat rack, barbell, and dumbbells. You'll see later I give you quite a bit of flexibility in the programs and list many substitutions so that you can find movements that work for you and your circumstances. If you want to follow the program to a T, there are a few items you'll need. First item would be a weight belt for weighted pull-ups. This one's from Spud Inc. It's a really good weight belt, and this is a fairly popular brand for this kind of thing. Second item would be straps for Romanian deadlifts. These are Versa grips. They work really well. I don't care how strong your grip is. Eventually, you're going to need to strap up for Romanian deadlifts. Last of the required items is a neck harness if you want to do all my recommended neck training, particularly in the Battering Ram program. As a side note, I originally bought this for direct neck work, but I've been pleasantly surprised to find that it doubles as quite the versatile fashion piece, perfect for the office, provided you're business casual, of course, a night out with the wife, and weekend strolls through the park. Truly an underrated wardrobe essential. As far as optional equipment, we have Olympic weightlifting shoes. If you're not familiar with these, they have an elevated heel. This might allow you to squat deeper and get more out of your quad training. Lastly, we have a lifting belt that you might like to wear for squatting and deadlift variations. Again, entirely optional. I actually prefer to do my Romanian deadlifts without a belt, but totally up to you. Our first program is Freight Train. This is a 3-day per week full body program that I've designed for newer lifters or those of you who can't get to the gym more than 3 days per week. By full body, I don't mean we're hitting the entire body during each training session. I just mean we have elements of upper and lower body on each training day. This follows an A, B, C, D format, so we have 4 different training day variations. I'd like you to run this for at least 12 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and throw up the program schedule that you can find in the Freight Train spreadsheet. This is going to give you an idea of what the program will look like over the weeks. Now, the most common alignment is going to be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday training schedule to align with the typical work or school week, but you could start this program on any day of the week. It doesn't matter. That would just be day 1. So, for instance, if you want to start this on a Thursday, that would be day 1 of week 1 of the program where you're doing that first session A. You're going to go train, rest, train, rest, train, rest, rest. The program mainly features alternating movement patterns. This is set up somewhat similarly to Greg Knuckles' beginner program that you can find for free on the app Boost Camp. The meat and potatoes of the training sessions will consist of the following. For the lower body, we have squats and hip hinges alternating each session. Then we have horizontal and vertical pulls and horizontal and vertical presses. If you want to follow a minimalistic version of this program, you could just do those 3 first movement patterns. This is perfectly viable. You just might get less out of the program from a muscle growth perspective than if you did all the other isolation work. From there, I throw in direct arm work, so isolation for the biceps and triceps. And then after that, we have isolation for the calves, neck, side and rear delts, and core. So now we're going to dive into the individual training sessions. Feel free to follow along in the Training Session Outlines tab of the Freight Train spreadsheet. This is going to show you the movement, what we're trying to accomplish with that movement, a list of substitutions, my recommended rep range, set count, and intensity. As we go through these, I'll show footage of myself performing the exercises, if I have the footage, and I'll give you my recommended rep range and briefly discuss substitutions, because I know this is a very important thing for the average person. We'll get into other variables like volume and intensity later on in the video. Here is Session A, first day of the program. We're going to start out with the barbell Romanian deadlift in the 6 to 10 rep range. Now, the RDL is on my Mount Rushmore of hypertrophy lifts. Incredible posterior chain movement. Not only will it torch your glutes and hamstrings, but it'll work your back as well, particularly the spinal erectors. And as a huge bonus, in the spirit of the old school fullback physique, it can blow up your traps as well as you get stronger. For substitutions, I really just want you to be doing some sort of heavy deadlifting variation, preferably with a barbell. The stiff-legged deadlift will be my ideal substitution if for some reason you don't want to do an RDL. And the conventional deadlift, although not on the same level in terms of lower body hypertrophy as the stiff-legged deadlift and RDL, it would work just fine in this spot, especially for a beginner. Next, for our vertical pull, we have the weighted neutral grip pull-up in the 5 to 8 rep range. Now, I know a lot of beginners might not be able to do pull-ups at all. If that's the case, feel free to use an assisted pull-up machine, and if your gym doesn't have one of those, a lat pull-down or any kind of pull-down machine would suffice here. Now, the weighted neutral grip pull-up, it's one of my favorite movements of all time. It'll help you get that stealth bomber back. Keep it controlled, no flailing around like a CrossFitter. And if you don't want to use a neutral grip, a chin-up with a supinated grip or a normal pronated pull-up would work just fine in this slot. Then we have a seated dumbbell press for our vertical press. These are going to be done in the 8 to 12 rep range, and I'm having you do a seated variation here just to give your lower back a little bit of a rest from the RDLs we did earlier in the session. If for whatever reason you can't use dumbbells, a barbell would work just fine. You could also find some sort of shoulder press machine in your gym if it has one, and if none of those are available, a standing press variation would also work just fine in this slot. Now we're going to throw in some biceps work, and we're going to do that with the inclined dumbbell curl in the 6 to 10 rep range. Now, I'm really not that concerned with what kind of curl you do, especially if you're a beginner. It may be that you just select a curl variation that allows you to superset with another exercise to expedite your workout. I really like inclined dumbbell curls because of that added stretch you get. If I only had one biceps exercise for the rest of my life, I would probably pick this one. Now we're going to do some core work with weighted decline sit-ups in the 8 to 12 rep range. I like to hold the weight behind my head on these to make the movement more challenging, and you might benefit from rounding your spine slightly to keep tension on your core. For core movements in general, I like to include exercises that are loadable or progressible, no bodyweight ab circuits. So if you can't do a decline sit-up or don't have a decline bench, feel free to do a machine crunch or a cable crunch. This is an old school fullback program, and a thick, strong neck is a staple of that old school fullback look. So of course, I had to include some direct neck training. And for this beginner program, I wanted to keep things as simple as possible. So I've included one movement, and that is the neck curl. Now, especially if you're a total beginner, you may see neck growth from something like a Romanian deadlift or other deadlifting variations, or even something like a squat or overhead press. So this is optional. You might not need it. And I wanted to keep the neck training in a high rep range. So we're going to do 15 to 20 reps here, and some technique considerations. These may leave an imprint on your forehead, so you might want to wear a hat or some sort of towel. And also, your hands are simply acting as hooks here. They're there to just hold the weight. You're not trying to pull the weight with your hands. It's very easy to cheat on these, so look up for that. Mild resistance from your own hand may be all you need here. Or if you want to do this at home, you could simply put a book or some sort of light item on your head and do curls with those. Remember, we're not trying to break any records here, so stay safe. We're going to kick off session B with the flat barbell bench press. Wouldn't be an old school fullback program without this lift. We saw quite a few of strong benches over the course of the program. Now, I like a slight pause on this lift, keeps me injury free and also looks a bit cooler. Any kind of flat or incline dumbbell or barbell bench press variation would work just fine in this slot. You could also do a machine chest press or weighted dip, but if you do weighted dips, make sure that you lean forward a little bit to bias the chest. A weighted push-up would also be fine, provided you have the equipment to set that up. Now we have a machine squat for our squat pattern. We're going to do these in the 6 to 10 rep range, and the idea here is to include a squat where we can have the quads serve as the limiting factor and maybe reduce some axial fatigue to accommodate for lifts we have lined up later in the session. Now, I'm not very specific here because the kinds of machines my viewers will have access to will vary. Personally, I've been using this horizontal hack squat for the better part of a year. It took me almost a decade to do anything other than barbell squatting, and I can tell you that machine squats from a hypertrophy perspective will pay off. A hack squat or belt squat would be ideal for this slot. You could also do a Smith machine, pendulum squat, leg press, or Bulgarian split squat would also be fine. Now, if you can't fathom doing anything other than a barbell squat, feel free to do barbell squats. I would recommend a high bar or front squat variation, but keep in mind we will be doing high bar squats in session D. For our horizontal pull, we have a classic, the bent over barbell row. Now, I'm going to recommend stricter form on these. I like to bring the bar as far down as possible while maintaining a hinge position. As you get stronger on these, you might feel some carryover to the RDLs and vice versa. Now, for substitutions, I'd recommend a T-bar row or pen lay row, but a chest-supported or cable row would also work just fine. If you elected to do barbell squats instead of machine squats, you might benefit from the chest-supported or cable variations to give your lower back a little bit of a rest. Now we'll get into isolation movements. We have easy bar pushdowns for the triceps in the 8 to 12 rep range. This is a simple and accessible movement, so I think it fits well here in the beginner program. Now, if you don't have access to an easy bar, I'll recommend a rope or V-bar variation. And if for whatever reason you can't do pushdowns, a skull crusher would be a good substitution. Overhead extension variations are great, but keep in mind we will be doing these in session D. I love the JM press, and you will see it in the Battering Ram program, but this lift can be awkward for a lot of people, and I would not recommend it for a beginner. Now we're going to do side and rear delt isolation in superset form with dumbbell lateral raises and rear delt flies in the 10 to 15 rep range. Now, I will say this is likely the least important slot of the entire program. We are doing vertical pressing, and your rear delts will get some stimulation from pulling movements, so you could get away with skipping this, especially as a beginner. I will say, though, that this shouldn't take very long. The warm-up time should be quick, and I'm having you superset, so why not throw them in? For substitutions, I would recommend anything you can superset for the rear and side delts. So you could do these exercises on a cable. You could also do upright rows and face pulls on a cable, whatever works for you and your gym situation. Then we're going to do some calf work in the 10 to 15 rep range. I'll recommend a standing calf raise machine, but feel free to use any variation that allows you to get a deep stretch. When it comes to calves, genetics do reign supreme, and there are non-obese individuals out there with incredible calf development, and they don't train them at all. If you're content with your calves or you don't want to train them, it wouldn't be the end of the world if you left this out. Now we're moving back to the same movement patterns we saw in session A with some variations. We're kicking off session C with the single arm standing dumbbell press in the 8 to 12 rep range. Now, this is a lift you are not going to see very often out in the wild. I think Jeff Alberts is the only bodybuilder I've seen consistently perform this movement. Now, this is a tough lift, very demanding on the core, and when I do them, I feel my entire body working. A little bit of a lean is natural, especially with some heavy weight, but I would not go into any extreme contortions to try and get the weight up. You will tweak your lower back if you do that consistently, and really any vertical press would work here, but I will recommend a standing variation as we did seated in session A, and for hypertrophy, a seated press would work just fine in this slot. Now we have an underrated movement in the 45-degree back extension. We're going to do these in the 8 to 12 rep range. This lift fits well here in this slot as it might be the purest form of hinging you can do. You can't cheat with quad drive as your knees are fully locked out and fixed behind a pad. They're also a little bit less fatiguing than the RDLs we did earlier in the session, which is why I've included them here. To load this, I like to hold weight plates with bent elbows so that it doesn't hit the ground, and you may benefit from using a small barbell or easy bar. The issue with this, though, is that most back extensions have handles, and these may obstruct the bar path. This is why I prefer to use weight plates. Personally, I do these with a single leg variation, as I'd like to have kids one day, and to get in some extra unilateral work. I got these from Alec Onkiri, who I noted earlier in the video, and you will see them in the Battering Ram program. Don't forget to brace and keep your back flat. I think it's easy to get lazy with the bracing when you're using variations that do not require as much in terms of absolute load. If you start adding weight to this and don't brace properly, your lower back will be angry with you. A weighted GHD extension would be the ideal substitution. It's very similar to the 45-degree variation, but I like 45 degrees a bit more as the tension is more evenly distributed throughout the entire movement. Now, hamstring curl variations will also be a substitution. This might be ideal for pure hypertrophy. I just think that hinging is more fullbacky than doing hamstring curls, so I've included another hinge. Now we'll get to a vertical pull. We're going to go with the supinated lat pull down in the 8 to 12 rep range. Now I wanted to include a lift with an alternate grip from the neutral grip pull-ups in session A. Also a lift that might be a little bit more stable and easier on the joints. This is a classic bodybuilding movement that many mass monsters from the past have used to get huge. Any kind of lat pull down or pull down machine variation will suffice here, and the assisted pull-up machine would also work fine. You could also just continue on with the bodyweight movements, but if you do this, I'll recommend a chin-up so that we have an alternate grip from the neutral grip in session A. Now we have a dumbbell hammer curl to get a little bit more brachialis and brachioradialis relative to a standard biceps curl. We're going to do these in the 8 to 12 rep range, and you could also do them on a cable with a rope or a machine if you have one. Now, reverse curl variations would also work well in this slot and accomplish the same goal. I will say, though, that reverse curls are a bit more of a pure brachialis and brachioradialis movement relative to a hammer curl. You could also do normal bicep curls in this slot, but I do think that doing hammer curls and reverse curls will pay off in the long run, as pulling movements on their own are not enough to maximally grow the brachialis and brachioradialis. For our core movement, I'm going to recommend a machine crunch. Now, I know many of you might not have this at your gym, so if not, go with the cable crunch, or you could just do decline sit-ups again. Now, the ab wheel rollout is a lift I really like, and I was tempted to include them here in this slot, but the transition from kneeling to standing involves a few steps, and I'd like to master this myself before recommending to the masses. Then once again, we have the neck curl from session A. Okay, so back to the movement patterns from session B. We're going to start off session D with the high bar squat in the 6 to 10 rep range. We did machine squats in the last session, so now's the time to get some free weight squatting in. I'm a fan of deep squatting, and those Olympic weightlifting shoes really help with this. Try not to dive bomb the descent and stay as upright as you can to maintain the focus on the quads. For a substitution, I'll recommend the front squat, although for the purposes of hypertrophy, really any big quad movement would work. You could do a leg press, you could do machine squats again, but I do think for a beginner, it will pay off to become proficient in the squat. Next, we have a classic movement, the single arm dumbbell row. We're going to do these in the 6 to 10 rep range, and I'd recommend using the back of an incline bench for support on these to stay out of the way of your fellow gym goers. When I do these, I like to keep my elbow close to the body, and for substitutions, I'd recommend some kind of rowing variation that's easier on the lower back, since we did the high bar squats earlier in the session. A chest supported or cable row might be your best bet here. Now we have the incline dumbbell press in the 6 to 10 rep range. Another classic lift. I think many gym bros would consider this their favorite chest exercise. I like to use just a slight incline so that I don't feel my shoulders working too hard. And I have all the same substitutions as the bench from session B, but ideally I would have you do some kind of incline press since we did flat bench in that session. For triceps isolation, we have the cable overhead extension in the 8 to 12 rep range. I recommend using a rope attachment for this. Personally, I slept on overhead work for a long time, and I do regret it. I would recommend throwing this into your program to make sure you're optimally hitting the long head of the triceps. Any kind of overhead work will suffice here. I just find that this cable variation with the rope tends to be the easiest on the elbows for most people. You could do an easy bar, overhead extension. You could do a French press, single arm dumbbell. It will all work. Once again, we have a dumbbell side and rear delt superset. We'll keep the flies and substitute in Lou raises for the side delts, 10 to 15 reps once again. The Lou raise is just a cooler alternative to the lateral raise, huge range of motion, and great for overall shoulder health. Start light on these. It is a humbling exercise. Feel free to sit down on a bench, or better yet, lay down on an incline bench for the dumbbell flies. This may make the two-handed variation a bit smoother. And once again, this is not a super important slot in this program. I just want to make sure we can quickly get in some side and rear delt work. So feel free to use any superset that works for you and your gym situation. Then as in session B, we have the standing calf raise in the 10 to 15 rep range. Now we're going to get into my second program, Battering Ram. This is a 5-day per week program that will be a little bit more thorough than Freight Train. It follows a lower, upper, lower, back and chest, arms and delts split. I'll go ahead and throw up the program schedule from the Battering Ram spreadsheet. I've set it up for 8 weeks, and each training week will look the same, so pick the day of the week you want to start on, probably a Monday, and you'll ideally keep the same weekly schedule over the course of the entire program. Once again, I'm going to walk through each training session so you can follow along in the Training Session Outlines tab of the Battering Ram spreadsheet. Some of these lifts were featured in Freight Train earlier in the video, so if that's the case, I will just gloss over them and give you a timestamp. Let's get into it. First session, lower body. We're going to start off with the Romanian deadlifts we saw in the Freight Train program. I'll bring down the reps slightly. We'll go 5 to 8 here. And then we'll get into some hamstring isolation with the standing hamstring curl in the 10 to 15 rep range. Now feel free to do a lying hamstring curl. They are similar movements. Personally, I prefer the seated variation, but we're doing those later in the week, so I've included this standing curl to give you a little bit more variation. Now, as a session intermission, as Alberto Nunez would say, we're going to get in our calf work with the standing calf raise we saw in Freight Train. Now, this is still challenging work, of course, but I wanted to include this here to give your system a little bit of a rest before we get into quad training. We'll do 10 to 15 reps in this slot. Then we'll get into a machine squat. We'll do 6 to 10 reps. We saw this in Freight Train. Since we did the RDLs earlier in the session, I wanted a squat variation with less axial fatigue. Now, what you do here will depend on what you have access to. A hack or belt squat would be great. You could also do a pendulum squat, leg press, Bulgarian split squat, or a Smith machine squat. We then get in some quad isolation with the leg extension in the 10 to 15 rep range. Now, I'm not sure if there's a single high-level bodybuilder that doesn't have this in their routine. Phenomenal movement, targets the entire quad, and allows us to drive more volume into the quads while using a different movement pattern. At 10 to 15 reps, this will get uncomfortable. There will be a lactic acid buildup. Something I learned from Jeff Alberts is to take a few seconds, let that lactic acid clear out, and continue the set. This is going to let you push to true muscular failure instead of doing what most people do, which is ending the set early when it gets uncomfortable or well before that. Now, I have a sissy squat as a substitution here. It's a movement that, like the leg extension, targets the rectus femoris. Now, I've never done these personally, and I would rather you do a leg extension, but if you don't have access to a leg extension machine, this could be a good substitution here for you. And if none of these sound good and you still want the extra quad volume, I would recommend something like a leg press, Bulgarian split squat, or walking lunge. We're going to include our core work on this day with weighted decline sit-ups that we saw in Freight Train. We're going to lower the reps slightly, go 6 to 10 here. And then we'll get into our neck training. In addition to the neck curls we saw in Freight Train, we're going to add in neck extensions for a superset. Now, you will need a harness if you want to do the neck extensions, and we're going to keep both movements in the 15 to 20 rep range. If anything, I'd want you to go higher, say 20 to 30 reps. Keep in mind, you are doing this at your own risk. Please be careful. This is your spine we're talking about. Slow progression is the best progression. If anything ever feels off, just stop. There should never be any pain. And I'm going to link a video by Nsima Yang. Please watch that before you dive into neck training. And now, I'll be honest, I've never done neck training in a gym, always at my house. I have some weight plates, so why not? If you don't want to buy a neck harness, I do think you could get away with just doing neck curls. And if you don't want to do them at the gym, as I said earlier, you could do them in your home, laying on a bed and using random objects as resistance. Now we have our full upper body day, and the first 4 movements here we saw in Freight Train, so I'll go through quickly. We're going to do weighted neutral grip pull-ups in the 5 to 8 rep range, then we'll move to flat barbell bench press, 6 to 10 reps, and then single arm dumbbell rows, also 6 to 10 reps, and then we have the single arm standing dumbbell press in the 8 to 12 rep range. Now, for substitutions here, I don't really care what you do as long as it's some sort of overhead press. In the Freight Train program, I wanted to make sure there was a mix of seated and standing presses. I'm not too worried about that here. This is a taxing movement, so no problem if you want to do some kind of seated or machine press. Now we get into arm isolation for the biceps. We're going to do a machine preacher curl in the 8 to 13 rep range. Now, if you don't have a machine for this, feel free to just use a normal preacher curl setup with an easy bar, or you could elect to use dumbbells for a single arm variation. And other than that, I would recommend an incline dumbbell curl, but keep in mind you will see those later in the week. For triceps, I'm having you do a cable triceps extension with a rope, preferably a long rope. We'll also do 8 to 13 reps here, and I like this variation due to the added range of motion you get. Some might say that my form is bad as my elbows come up. I feel like I get more out of the movement this way, and I can feel my entire triceps working. For substitutions, I'll recommend overhead extension variations or other triceps push-down variations. We're going to do the JM press later in the week. And for arm work in general, you may just want to pick 2 exercises you can superset. For example, you could do some sort of cable curl so you can stay on this cable station, or you could do something like an easy bar curl with a skull crusher. Both will work just fine. And now we're going to close out the session with the same rear and side delt superset we saw in Freight Train with the dumbbell rear delt flies and lateral raises. We're going to keep it at 10 to 15 reps. Okay, second lower body day, we're going to start off with quads this time, and we'll do that with the high bar squat we saw in Freight Train, which we'll keep at 6 to 10 reps. Then we're going to get into quad isolation with the leg extension, still at 10 to 15 reps. After that, as in the session earlier in the week, we're going to throw calves in as a break between the more difficult work. We're going to up the reps to 20 to 30 here. And then we're going to get into some single leg 45-degree back extensions. I mentioned earlier that you'd be seeing these in Battering Ram. These cook my hamstrings and glutes, and they're a bit easier to recover from than deadlifting variations. We're going to do 6 to 10 reps with these. And this is a tough movement, so if you've never done anything like this, I would recommend maybe upping the reps, something like 10 to 15. And for substitutions, you could just do a normal 45-degree back extension or a GHD extension. Those would work just fine. Then we have seated hamstring curls. I think this is the most effective... What the hell was that? Must have been outside. Anyways, I think this is the most effective hamstring curl variation.
I've never seen this break you out.
8+ reps was it.
A blue lobster is a rare, like it only happens 1 in 2 million.
Gatorade, take a month off of training.
Jiu-jitsu.
Once a year.
Hey, wait, yeah!
I just blacked out. I'm not exactly sure what just happened. Hopefully everyone's still with me. But anyways, as I was saying, I think this is the most effective hamstring curl variation. We're going to do 10 to 15 reps here, and substitutions would just be the other hamstring curl variations. And then for core work, we're going to throw in the machine crunch we saw in Freight Train. We'll up the reps slightly. We're going to do 10 to 15. All right, so we have a dedicated day to back and chest. This will be a good session. Our first 3 movements you saw in Freight Train, so we're going to start out with the barbell row in the 6 to 10 rep range, then we'll move to incline dumbbell presses, also in the 6 to 10 rep range, and then we'll do a supinated lat pull down, 8 to 12 reps. Now we'll throw in a machine fly in the 10 to 15 rep range. Remember, the day after this, we're going to be doing arms and delts, and I've selected a fly variation here for the extra chest volume as opposed to a press, as all that pressing and triceps isolation stacked on top of each other might be more likely to lead to upset elbows for the average trainee, and for substitutions, a dumbbell or cable fly would work just fine. I have a similar rationale in selecting our next movement, the machine pullover in the 10 to 15 rep range. I like this here for the extra back volume as it's a different movement pattern from a vertical pull or row. The biceps are taken completely out of the movement and it doesn't stress the elbows. Now, this is a rare piece of equipment, so most of you will be doing a lat pullover on a cable. I would consider this optional, so if you don't want the extra back volume, feel free to skip this. We do get plenty of pulling in throughout the week, and this is going to be where we'll throw in our second round of neck training with the neck curl and neck extension superset. We will keep this in the 15 to 20 rep range. To finish off the week, we have what should be a fairly enjoyable session with arms and delts. First three movements we saw in freight train. We're going to start off with the dumbbell hammer curl in the 10 to 15 rep range. Then we'll move to cable overhead extensions with the rope, 8 to 13 reps. After that, we'll do incline dumbbell curls in the 6 to 10 rep range. And then finally, we get to what at the moment is one of my favorite lifts, the JM press, invented by American powerlifting legend Jason Blaha.
Well, let me give you guys a bicep shot first.
Shoot, I misread that. The inventor of the JM press was actually not Jason Blaha, but American powerlifting legend J.M. Blakely.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
Apologies for the mix-up. Anyways, this lift is a mix between a skull crusher and a close grip bench. I'll link a tutorial video by JM himself.
Some folks are born.
I'd recommend giving that a watch and tweaking your form from there. You can see here how I perform the lift. I like to bring the bar down to around my chin. I like doing these one after I've already done some kind of triceps extension earlier in the session, and two with a biceps pump. I've placed this here in the session where it is, since we've already done the overhead extensions earlier, so our elbows will be nice and warm, and we have the incline dumbbell curls before this, so we'll have a biceps pump. Your forearms will come and meet your biceps at the bottom of the movement, so having a biceps pump will serve as a bit of a cushion. This does depend on how big your arms are. Very big guys have a pretty small range of motion with this. The movement puts a ton of tension on the triceps. We're going to keep the reps a little bit higher at 10 to 15. For substitutions, I'll recommend push downs or a skull crusher, and we're going to finish off with the dumbbell rear delt fly and Lou Ray's superset we saw earlier in freight train. All right, I'm going to quickly walk through how to use my program spreadsheets. This is the Excel version of freight train. So each sheet has 4 elements. This is the first, it's the notes from ZDSP tab. As I mentioned earlier, I have sections on exercise selection, volume, proximity to failure, progression, how to choose your working weight, rest times, and then I list my contact information. Be sure to read all this before you start the program. And then we have the training session outlines tab. This is what I went through during the video. Here you're going to find the exercises, substitutions, rep ranges, my recommended set count and intensity for each training session. Then we have the program schedule that I showed earlier. This maps out the 12 weeks. And what I really want to do here is go through these weekly training log tabs. You can use these to track your training sessions. You see we have the full 12 weeks, 1 through 12. I'd recommend you write in the date and weekday for each training session and rest day. We have 8 columns here. The first is the exercise. You'll just relabel the cell if you're going to do one of my substitutions. Then we have a row for each individual set. For example, this row here will pertain to the first set of Romanian deadlifts for that session. So you're going to have the set number. You'll be entering in the load or weight you'll be using. The rep range and RIR range are from my training session outlines tab. This column titled last will denote your performance from the prior time you did the exercise. This is the first time these lifts are performed in the program, so there are dashes here because you're not comparing to anything. And then this reps column here will be where you enter in how many reps you get on each individual set. And the verse last column compares performance to the prior time you did the lift. So let's say you use 180 pounds on the RDL for each set, your first training session. And let's say you get 10 reps on the first set and 9 on the second. That's how you'd enter in that information. Now, let's go to the next session where you're going to perform the RDLs, which would be the second training day during week 2. The first thing you would do is enter in the performance from the last session. So we got 10 reps with 180 on the first set and 9 reps with 180 on the second. And let's say we're going to go up to 185 for this first set and stay at 180 for the second. That's how this is going to look going into the session. Obviously, you would have this filled out for all the other lifts. And personally, I like to email myself a screenshot of this going into the session so I can see what I have on the menu for that day. After this session, you would record your results. So let's say you got 10 reps with 185 on the first set and 10 reps with 180 on the second. This is how I would denote those performance comparisons. So on the first set, we did 10 reps with 180. Now we did 10 reps with 185. So we added 5 pounds. And on the second set, we added a rep with 180. So I put in +1 rep here. So now let's back up and say these were your numbers. Let's say you got 9 reps on the first set and 9 on the second. So you can't really compare 185 in this session to 180 in the last. So personally, I like to just leave a dash like that. And then for the second set, performance was flat. So I like to throw that in there. That's just how I like to do things. Feel free to do what works for you. One other thing I would suggest is finding a way to denote PR opportunities. This will make it easier to keep an up-to-date PR sheet. Again, my PR sheet video is linked below. What I like to do is highlight the row if I have a chance to set a PR. So let's say for weighted neutral grip pull-ups, we got 8 reps with 22.5 pounds last session, and we're going to move up to 25. Let's say that the most amount of reps we've ever done with 25 pounds is 6 reps. So that would mean we have the chance to surpass that for this session. What I like to do is highlight this any color just to give myself a visual cue that I have the chance to set a PR in this session. And if I do set a PR, let's say we get 7 reps here. That's a 1 rep PR. I like to just highlight this red. That gives me a cue to go update my PR sheet. That's just how I do it. Do what works best for you. And then last thing, adding sets. If you want to add sets, be sure to click the bottom row of the movement you want to add a set to. So let's say you want to add a 3rd set of incline dumbbell curls. You would go ahead and highlight the bottom row, right click, and hit insert 1 row above. Then you have your 3rd set there, and you would just go ahead and relabel everything. First off, I want to stress that results are contingent upon making training a priority. You need to be taking things like diet and sleep seriously if you want to stack productive training sessions together and progress over the long term. I don't go into detail on these variables in the video, so if you need guidance here, just email me. Now, this next point is especially important if you watch my Jacked Fullback series. I don't want you to compare yourself to anyone I featured in those videos. Those are pro athletes with elite genetics and, in many cases, elite muscle building genetics. On top of that, quite a few players from the list tested positive for PEDs at some point during their careers. I don't find this surprising. I think that's just the reality of pro football and high-level sports in general. That's not to take anything away from the athletes. I just want you to know that these are not people you should be comparing yourself to. Lastly, if you do run one of these programs, please let me know. I want to hear how it's going. Take progress photos, use my spreadsheets to track your lifts. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'd be happy to help you out any way I can. That is all. Have a great day.